Hello, everyone. Tonight, we venture into a chapter of history that's a little more somber. We're stepping back to a world marked by disease, hardship, and the humble pottage pot. Together, we'll discover what daily existence actually meant during the Middle Ages, well beyond the glittering castles or valiant knights that stories often silvercoat for us. The truth? Most of us today wouldn't make it through the first sunrise. Before we settle in, if you're enjoying these tales, feel free to show your support by subscribing or leaving a message below. Share where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I'm always amazed seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim those lights or start up a gentle fan to set the mood. Let's gently slip into this evening's journey. Imagine this. You've just opened your eyes in the year 1325. The one thing you can be grateful for, you're alive. But so are the fleas. Your mattress, if it can be called that, is a matted pile of straw, scratchy and damp, once part of a barn just a season ago. There's no soft bedding, no pillows, and certainly no fine sheets from faraway lands. Your one blanket is wool, unwashed since the previous year, heavy from the many nights of use, and it carries the weight and smell of everything it's seen. Dawn breaks with the endless tolling of church bells, louder and somehow harsher than any alarm clock. You wake in a small wooden dwelling, a single room with no glass in the walls, just thin wooden planks, gaps, and a dirt floor. You share this space with your entire family, a few animals, and the countless crawling bugs living with you. The air is thick with layers of scent, sweat, old ale, goat, and some tang you hope isn't mold, though deep down, you know it is. No candles fill your home with gentle fragrance. They don't exist, and even if they did, they'd sink right into the ground. You stretch, but regret it instantly. The air bites your skin with cold, and your joints ache as if you've already lived a long life. At 22, you're considered middle-aged by your era's standards. Your back creaks, your knees grind, and getting up is a calculated risk. The floor might be soaked from the rain seeping through your roof, or hardened by what the neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet meet whatever's waiting. Privacy doesn't really exist. Next to you stir your whole family, perhaps a distant cousin who never bothered to leave. No curtains, no walls, just everyone and everything together. In medieval Europe, solitude is rare. You're always joined by relatives, rodents, and more. And remember, this is only the start of your day. Having escaped your uncomfortable bed, nature urgently demands your attention. Here's where you'll truly long for the comforts of a modern bathroom. There's no seat, no paper, certainly no running water. Just a wooden bucket outside, likely already used by someone else. The smell is unforgettable and inescapable. You hold your breath, do what you must, and then, following custom, hurl it out onto the street with a warning cry, though few actually heed it. In town, the dirt paths double as sewers, full of rainwater, animal waste, and other things best left unnamed. If your village is lucky enough to have shared latrines, you'll squeeze beside strangers with little privacy and air that barely stirs. You might attempt conversation, but it's hard to speak when you're busy keeping from breathing too deeply. No one has heard of toilet paper. Most use leaves, rags, or whatever's around, sometimes nothing at all. This perhaps explains why shaking hands isn't exactly in style. If you live in a castle, things are only slightly improved. There, you might have access to a chute carved into the wall, dropping everything down into the moat below, hardly more pleasant and occasionally a route for intruders. Whether rich or poor, using the bathroom is far from private, often chilly, and seldom clean. One misstep could send you tumbling into the muck, and you still haven't washed up yet. Emerging from the bathroom, you might wish for a hearty meal. But in medieval Europe, Meals offer little comfort. Breakfast is whatever's left. No eggs, no coffee, not even a fresh, crusty loaf. Instead, you gather by the fire with a wooden bowl filled with thick, plain pottage, a slow-cooked stew made from whatever was available, some grains, maybe root vegetables, sometimes beans. It's been simmering for days, sometimes weeks, always topped up with more whatever you find. Anything resembling bread is likely hard and dry, made with whatever flour you can get, often with fillers like ground acorn or bark. Wheat is a luxury most never taste. Your drink? It's weak beer. Even the youngest sip it from dawn, since water is nearly always polluted. The beer is diluted, just enough to be safe, but no one drinks it for pleasure. Fruit, meat, or cheese rarely appear except on special days, and spices are treasures reserved for the wealthy. Mealtimes aren't a source of joy. They're necessary and rarely satisfying. After eating, you're hungrier than you'd like, but there's no time to dwell. Labor is calling. Getting dressed brings scant comfort. Your entire wardrobe amounts to one outfit, a rough wool or linen tunic, maybe something underneath if fortune is kind. You've likely worn the same thing for months, scrubbing stains with ashes now and then, never able to get it truly clean. Your shoes, if you even have any, are thin leather, letting in mud and cold. Most go barefoot, braving rocks, sharp debris, and worse. Your skin is constantly itchy. Fleas and lice are ever present, no matter your status. Children, monks, even the local priests scratch along with you. If a rash appears, that's just life. Medical care is non-existent, and infections linger. With your clothing heavy and uncomfortable, you begin your day outside, all the while suppressing the urge to smile. In the Middle Ages, most people keep their lips closed for a reason. There are no toothbrushes, no paste, not even a basic rinse. Some chew on twigs, maybe rinse with old wine or vinegar, but mostly your teeth fend for themselves and fail. Cavities are everywhere, gums are swollen, and decay sets in early. If you're wealthy enough to afford sugar, your teeth rot even faster. For everyone else, years of hard bread and rough grain wear them down slowly. Toothaches become background noise, a pain that lingers, sometimes so bad that people attempt to pull teeth themselves if a local haircutter moonlighting as a surgeon isn't available. Without antibiotics, infections often turn serious, even lethal. A bad tooth can be the end, and if you're hoping for romance, know this: bad breath is the norm. People don't judge your smile. They notice your land or poultry instead. Work takes up almost all your day. For nearly everyone, that means toiling in the fields that belong to a lord who probably doesn't know your name. You set out at sunrise, stopping only when darkness falls. Your tools are simple, your strength running low, but there's no break, save for Sundays, if the harvest or illness doesn't keep you there too. If you're a woman, your day multiplies. You bend over rows of crops, yet still feed children, stir pots, spin thread, and care for livestock. Daily tasks begin for most children as soon as they can walk. School is a far-off dream. Tradesmen like blacksmiths or tanners don't fare better, working long hours in smoky or pungent sheds for little beyond survival. There is no paid leave, no rest for sickness. The only rule: keep working or risk going hungry. Weather rules your life, indifferent to the season. Winters are punishing. There's no insulation, just wood with holes, and only a small fire, if fuel can be spared. Gathering wood is often illegal, and penalties can be severe. You sleep bundled in your damp tunic, waking to frozen toes and stiff hands. Frostbite? It's simply more bad luck. Summer, on the other hand, brings relentless heat. Your home turns stifling, no cooling breeze. Removing too many layers is frowned upon, so you sweat beneath thick wool, attracting flies and mosquitoes, while enduring the sound of crying children and restless neighbors through the night. You must keep working even as you risk heat illness. People simply call it a bad turn. No matter the time of year, your clothing still itches, the food isn't any better, and there's always more to do. If you're thirsty, fresh water is no blessing. It's a risk. Streams look inviting, but upstream a chamber pot might have just been emptied, or a dead animal rests unseen. Every sip is a gamble, contaminated with unseen dangers. That's why beer, even for children, becomes the default. Bathing isn't a habit, but a rarity. Some believe washing exposes your body to illness. Public bathhouses, where they exist, are often places for gossip or frowned-upon activities, which leads the local ministers to close many down. When you do attempt to wash, it's a major effort, collecting and heating water, then sharing a leaky tub with family, one after another. So, whether it's for drinking, washing, or cooking, water is always something to fear. One careless mouthful and you may spend your last days feverish in agony, pondering life's brevity. Medical care offers little hope. Any illness, whether a cough, rash, or something more sinister, is believed to be caused by an imbalance of 4 humors inside you. The cure for nearly anything is bloodletting, by knife or by leech. Your barber often does this as part of a haircut. For sadness or unease, people suggest purging or prayers. Break a bone, and the treatment is worse than the injury. Surgeons use blades that haven't seen proper cleaning in years, and pain relief is little more than fainting from agony. Germs, antibiotics, and real understanding are centuries away. Sometimes you pray, sometimes you just hope. The end result is, survival more often comes from luck than care. Should you miraculously survive, gratitude is given to divine mercy or the leech, not much to science. As day fades, you come back hungry, hoping for a decent meal. More often than not, what awaits is not just unsatisfying, it may be dangerous. Food spoils quickly with no cool storage. Meat hangs for days, found and fought over by flies and maybe rats as well. Bread, the heart of most meals, sometimes stretches with bark or clay to last longer. Certain grains carry toxic fungi that cause illness or delirium. Turnips, always turnips, appear in everything. Pottage simmers for generations, and fruit is fleeting. Cheese and butter are risky with spoilage, but still eaten when hunger prevails. Spices are as precious as gold. Most meals are flavored, if at all, by onions, salt, and the hard work itself. Catching your own meats is usually a crime, punishable by fines or death. Every bite, every meal is a test. After the meal, rest seems deserved. But there's little chance to relax. Faith is always present. The local minister, the church, and nosy neighbors make sure you attend to spiritual duty. Religion directs every part of life, times for prayer, rules for eating, rituals from birth to burial. You can't check sacred texts yourself. They're in Latin or another language only officials use. The parish leaders declare why things happen, and you're expected to follow. Tithes are required, as is obedience. Festivals offer brief pauses but always call for devotion, not enjoyment. Questioning authority is dangerous. Those who challenge, even quietly, face harsh punishment. Faith is both comfort and burden. Being a woman adds burdens. After all the same hardships, they face early marriages, frequent childbirth, and little say in their own survival. Educating girls is rare unless their family is privileged. Marriage isn't for love, but for property and alliances, often arranged before adolescence ends. Wives are expected to work, bear children, support the home, and remain silent. Questioning, protesting, or knowing too much might lead to harsh accusations, even deadly ones. Childbirth is especially perilous. Midwives help, but survival is never guaranteed. Widows and unmarried women face suspicion or danger. Even in religious communities, women have restricted roles, always ranked below men. Shortly put, for women, enduring suffering stirs expectation. They must carry on, quietly and tirelessly. On top of this, violence is ever present. There's little of the peaceful order we might imagine. Laws are often enforced harshly or ignored. Disputes get settled with fists, sometimes with weapons, in the street, at home, almost anywhere. Stealing, lying, or simply being accused can lead to brutal punishment. Hand removal, tongue piercing, public shaming, or forced trial by dangerous ordeal. Proving innocence may mean plunging your hand in boiling water or being thrown in a river. Survival means nothing is wrong, otherwise you're guilty. Death sentences are public, drawing crowds as entertainment. Home violence is considered normal, as are brawls in the streets. Soldiers march for war or local feuds as often as not. Violence isn't a failure of order. It is the order of medieval society. The threat is never far. People walk carefully, always wary. If you survive all of this, fleas, bad food, force, and neglect, death still comes early. Living past 40 is rare enough to be notable. You might even be called the old one, more a comment on statistics than affection. Average life expectancy is short, in part because so many children don't survive into adulthood. Nearly half die before reaching age 5. If you endure, work starts young and never really stops. Most lose teeth, maybe fingers, and much hope along the way. For women, dying in childbirth is a real and constant risk. There are no doctors with advanced knowledge, just prayers and a helpful hand. This, then, is the Middle Ages, not a story of chivalry and feasts, but one of endurance, community, and hope in the face of struggle that shapes every sunrise and sunset. Before we settle in, if you enjoy this journey, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if you truly feel at home here. And I'd love to know where and when you're joining us from, so please share in the comments. It's always amazing to see our little community from all around the world. Now, if you want, turn down the lights, maybe let the fan hum quietly in the background, and get comfortable as we begin. Let's travel first to ancient Greece, land of stories, thinkers, and unusual medical ideas. Picture this. It's 400 BCE. You are a woman, feeling tense in your chest, with your heart beating fast and fearful thoughts coming and going. You share your worries with the local healer. After some deep thinking, he says you're suffering from a wandering womb. Hard to imagine, but it was a real belief. The famous physician Hippocrates, the same one behind the Hippocratic Oath, was convinced that a woman's womb could travel around inside her body. Too many emotions, too much worry, or even living a quiet life could cause your womb to wander. The symptoms, dizziness, shaking, shortness of breath, were, they said, caused by this traveling organ on the move. And the cure was far from comforting. There were no soothing blankets or cups of tea. Instead, doctors would hold sweet-smelling herbs near your lower body and strong, unpleasant scents near your face, trying to coax your uterus back to its place. You'd lie there as someone waved burning garlic around you, hoping to fix you. All of this felt very official. In ancient Greece, where women had little freedom, these odd explanations were the only answers people had for female suffering. Anxiety wasn't seen as something from the mind. It was blamed on a restless body part. True, they didn't have modern science or brain scans, but pinning all distress on a wayward womb now seems like deciding your car won't run because the cup holder moved. Yet the feelings were real. Grief, fear, sadness. But instead of asking how women felt, healers handed out incense and told them their bodies were misaligned. So began the silence, not only of misunderstood pain, but also of unheard voices. Next, our journey carries us to ancient Rome. Civilization was growing, The city's plumbing was ahead of its time, but compassion had not quite caught up. For a Roman woman troubled by anxious thoughts, there were no therapists, no hotlines, no relaxing bath bombs. Instead, you'd be advised to marry, start a family, or both, as soon as you could. Medical men, who were almost always men, said your discomfort was thanks to an idle womb. They didn't say anxiety. Instead, they used terms like furor uterinus, which might sound impressive, but meant the same old story. If you showed distress or even spoke out of turn, you were said to be neglecting your womanly duties. The prescription? Childbirth. And more childbirth. A Roman doctor named Soranus, who wrote medical texts for women, actually advised avoiding strong feelings altogether. "Don't feel," he said, as if that would help. Husbands were told to be gentle, but you can guess how far that went. If you were from a rich family, you might get wine or music as a remedy, but the belief was always that your womb needed fixing. For women with fewer means, there was little more than herbal mixtures, private prayers, or being ignored. If, heaven forbid, you questioned your husband or grieved too long, you could find yourself accused of being unstable or even touched by spirits. Suffering was met not with comfort, but often with suspicion and shame. So, while Rome built great roads and cities, anxious women were left with little more than shame. Their pain became something to be judged, explained away, or simply ignored. In all this, nobody stopped to ask what life was like for the women themselves. Now we find ourselves in the shadows of the Middle Ages, a time of plagues and superstition, when women with anxious minds were often seen as prey for evil forces. Medical ideas didn't just stall during these centuries, they moved backward. The ancient Greek notions of the wandering womb were still popular, now mixed with fear and religious panic. Women who trembled, wept, or struggled with intrusive thoughts were labeled as spiritually unwell. If you couldn't sleep or found yourself lost in tears, it wasn't seen as grief. It was seen as the work of demons. The church controlled healing, which often meant exorcisms or public shaming. In severe cases, accusations of witchcraft led to torture, or worse. Herbal remedies, a little knowledge of the stars, or simply being different were seen as gateways to evil. Anxiety was more than misunderstood. It was feared. That fear could lead to banishment, forced isolation, or even worse punishments. In monasteries and infirmaries, nuns tried to care for women with mental struggles, but the treatments were little more than prayers, solitude, and going without food. Rituals with crosses or simple tests to catch a reaction often sealed a woman's fate. These women weren't witches or sinners. They were people in pain, longing for relief, just trying to get through another night. But in a world ruled by fear, a trembling woman was seen as a danger, and dangers were silenced, not helped. The Renaissance, an age known for beauty, thought, and discovery, did not lift this burden from women. While artists and scientists explored new horizons, compassion for women's mental suffering seemed left in the dark. Theories had new language, but the blame was the same. The uterus still called out as the cause of it all. If you felt anxious or blue, the answer was not care, but sometimes leeches, bleeding, or even a hot poultice pressed to your middle. They believed the body had to be kept in balance, and for women, that often meant draining and quieting until you could no longer protest. Rest cures included dark rooms and scripts against reading, because thinking was thought dangerous to your health. In wealthier homes, women were sent to the countryside for rest, which mostly meant being watched, hushed, and given herbal drinks until they looked or acted better. The Renaissance prized harmony and poise, yet no one knew how to help a woman who was overwhelmed by heartache or sleepless nights. Her struggles were mostly dismissed, hidden, or labeled as simply women's troubles. In the grand halls of art and music, Women with anxious spirits often walked with heads bowed, questioning if they themselves were broken rather than shaped by their world. Moving into the 17th and 18th centuries, progress gathered speed. Telescopes stretched toward the stars. Philosophers debated new ideas of freedom, and Isaac Newton introduced new ways of seeing the world. But for women experiencing anxiety, all this reason gave little comfort. Male doctors with powdered wigs started talking about the nervous system. Women suffering emotional pain were described as nervous ladies, a term that sounded delicate, yet hid the old idea that women were too sensitive, too frail, or built to break. The uterus no longer wandered, but now the problem was too many nerves, too much imagination, or too much feeling. Rest was the main prescription. Warm baths, short walks, and especially laudanum, a mixture of alcohol and opium that could numb pain and emotion alike. For wealthier women, there were nervous retreats, where maids served you, but you were not encouraged to speak about your inner life, let alone think too deeply. Those with less were left to cope without any help. If a woman dared to show ambition, strong feelings, or anger, she could be labeled as unstable and quietly sent away, sometimes with nothing more than a husband's signature. Society praised public reason for men, but left women's voices in private sorrow, too often medicated and dismissed rather than understood. The Victorian era of the 1800s arrived with fashionable gowns, tight corsets, and even tighter rules for women's emotions. Anxiety hadn't disappeared. It had simply taken on a new name and a new kind of treatment. The rest cure, invented by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, was given to women who were suffering from what doctors called nervous problems. Bed rest, sometimes for months, was the prescription. No books, no visitors, no talking about feelings. The hope was that total stillness would bring healing, but for many, it brought a deep sense of losing oneself. Resisting the rest cure only led to more confinement. Even the famous writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman experienced this, leading her to write The Yellow Wallpaper, about a woman falling apart, not from illness, but from enforced silence. If you didn't recover through rest, there were asylums. Inside their stone walls, women endured ice baths, strange electrical treatments, days of observation or restraint. Some were given powerful medications. Their only crime was crying too much or refusing to keep up a cheerful front. No one asked about loss, violence, or pressures that might break the strongest spirit. In this world, women were expected to be calm and angelic. If not, they were set aside, elegantly but painfully, so as not to disturb the peace. By the early 1900s, change was in the air. Corsets relaxed a little, factories buzzed, and a man named Sigmund Freud introduced new ideas. Instead of claiming demons or sick wombs, he suggested that anguish came from a person's mind, sometimes from old wounds or hidden feelings. Women were now invited to speak on sofas, not just receive medicine. This was progress, in a way. Yet Freud and others often decided that a woman's anxiety came from secret desires or guilt toward her parents, especially her father. There was less physical harm, but the blame stayed inside. The message was, dig deep enough and you'll find the real cause inside yourself. If improvement didn't come, it was suggested you weren't trying or weren't ready for the truth. Psychoanalysis gained ground among the educated, a chance for women to talk, but still they were heard through the filter of male interpretation. Their pain was dissected, theorized, and named, but rarely truly seen for what it was. So the question hung in the air. Could a woman simply feel anxious, or was every worry turned into a theory about her faults? The 1950s brought images of shiny kitchens, pressed clothes, and happy families. But beneath those glossy surfaces, many women struggled in silence. Magazines and radio told them that all was well. So why did they feel uneasy? Into this world came Mother's Little Helper, sedative pills like Valium and Milltown, marketed straight to women, especially housewives. If you felt sad or anxious, you were told to just take a pill and smile. Doctors hardly asked about your life, your dreams, or your disappointments. These medicines offered assurance, but often led to dependence. Ad campaigns played right into this narrative, with lines like, "You can't set her free, but you can help her feel less trapped." By the 1960s, millions of women were taking these medications, not because of any illness, but because everyday life left them drained and unfulfilled. Yet talking about addiction or real discomfort was still off limits. The real question remained, what if the anxiety wasn't a disorder at all? What if it was a silent call, an inner alarm long ignored? In the 1970s, quiet shifts began. The home was still tidy, the dinner warm, but women started to wonder, why was help always given to them in a bottle instead of a listening ear? Why was discomfort something to hide? Women gathered in small groups and realized they were not alone. The burden wasn't just hormones or hysteria. It was the cost of being unseen, of carrying too much, of being asked to take care of everyone's feelings before their own. Books like The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan opened the door to a new conversation, naming the emptiness and restlessness women felt, even when they seemed to have it all. At last, someone said, "It isn't just you. It's the pressure, the silence, the expectations all around us." When women shared their stories out loud, things began to change. They questioned the medical system, entered professions as not just patients, but caregivers, and asked new questions about the source of their pain. There were still old biases, still misdiagnoses, but the sharing of stories was new and powerful. The focus began to shift from "what's wrong with me" to "what happened to me." In the 1980s and 90s, anxiety went from being hysteria or nerves to having real medical names: generalized anxiety, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress. Progress, yes, but also just a new set of labels. The science improved, but sometimes the care did not. If you were a woman suffering panic attacks in 1993, the doctor might hand you a prescription and suggest more rest, now blaming your lifestyle instead of your body. Therapy helped some, but it was still hard to find someone who would see your distress as valid and not just emotional. Finally, having a real diagnosis was like being given a flashlight after years in the dark. New medicines, SSRIs like Prozac, made a difference for some, but they were often handed out without full explanations or deeper questions. Beneath the new treatments, the old loneliness lingered. Even with new words and prescriptions, many still wondered if anyone would ask what was truly wrong. The 2000s brought new technology. Suddenly, not only doctors but also friends and strangers could weigh in on your feelings. Anxiety became not just something you felt inside, but something shared online, dissected in TED Talks, memoirs, and supportive forums. Researchers and therapists started saying, anxiety isn't always a sickness. It's sometimes a natural response to hardship. Trauma-informed care began to grow, asking what life experiences shaped your feelings, not just what chemicals lived in your brain. For women especially, this brought a new sense of relief. At last, their pain wasn't dismissed as weakness, but recognized as the result of struggle. Finally, suffering could be seen as a wound, not a flaw. Still, there were challenges. Life demanded more: work, home, children, all under the expectations of being healthy, happy, helpful, and well. New terms like burnout and high-functioning anxiety appeared, words that captured the old struggles in new ways. Therapy became easier for some to find, but still costly for many. Support was sometimes deep, and other times simply a suggestion to drink more water or try a new app, which could miss the real hurt beneath the surface. But things continued to move. Women could now connect across great distances, sharing truth, forming communities, and reminding one another that anxiety is not a sign of failure, but a call for understanding, a call that longs to be heard. And now, here we are, living in a world connected by screens, surrounded by constant messages and reminders, always on, always needed, always expected to respond. Women today are met with endless notifications and demands, pushed to juggle careers, families, and the pressure to appear polished and positive. Anxiety is now both something to hide and, strangely, something to post about. Sharing struggles online takes courage, but the advice given back can sometimes only scratch the surface. Self-care is often recommended, yet it becomes just one more item on a long to-do list. Through it all, one thing has changed little: the pressure. The pressure to do more, be more, achieve more, and keep everyone happy. It's no wonder that rest feels like rebellion and restlessness, like a shadow that never quite leaves. But here, a quiet truth is growing stronger. Anxiety is not a personal failure. It's a sign, a message from within, letting you know there is a limit to what one person, one heart can hold. After countless years of being silenced, overlooked, and hurried, many women are finally slowing down, not because life is easier, but because they are learning that impossible standards cannot bring peace. In homes and online groups, in yoga studios and therapy circles, a gentle revolution is taking place. It isn't loud, it doesn't need to be shared for likes. It simply exists. Women deciding to rest, to set boundaries, to let some things wait. Saying no has become, quietly, not a weakness, but an act of self-preservation. Canceling plans, logging off, leaving dishes for another day. These are small ways of reclaiming control and care. The inner critic may still whisper to do more, but now another voice answers, "You've done enough." Groups are forming where women listen to each other without judgment, saying, "Me too," not "just push through." They're learning together that healing is not a straight path. Some days bring progress, others bring tears, and all of it is okay. Perhaps anxiety doesn't mean you're broken. Maybe it means you are alert to a world that demands too much and gives too little back. So tonight, if your own mind is racing and your shoulders feel heavy, remember this: you're not a machine, and you were never made to be. In a time that praises endless activity, choosing rest is an act of kindness, an ancient, sacred, and revolutionary thing. Long before social media, short sleeves, or trendy tattoos, people have marked their skin with ink. The roots go back many thousands of years, not to young rebels or hardened fighters, but to figures like the Iceman, found high in the Alps and frozen for over 5,000 years. His body, preserved by time, bears dozens of dark marks crossing his joints and spine. Not dragons or words, just simple lines. These weren't random decorations. Scientists believe they were made with soot and sharp tools, perhaps to ease pain, an old form of healing written onto the skin. Not art for its own sake, but medicine and meaning. He was not alone, either. In ancient Egypt, tattooed mummies, mostly women, have been discovered with dotted patterns on their bodies. Some experts think the tattoos brought protection for mothers and children in childbirth, or showed devotion to the goddess Hathor. They weren't just worn, they were honored, carried into the afterlife as signs of what mattered most. Far off in Siberia's frozen tombs, ancient nobles were buried with bodies painted in animals and fantastic creatures. Deer, panthers, wings coiled across their arms and chests. For these people, tattoos were part of identity, possibly a key to the world after death. The tattoo's story is not one of rebellion, but of purpose. They're to heal, to protect, to remember, telling stories long before there were written words. To truly see the soul of tattooing, we journey to the islands of Polynesia. Here, tattoos, called tatau, were never shallow decisions. They were earned through ceremony, determination, and often pain. Tatau itself means to strike, the sound of a tool pressing ink into skin by hand. In these societies, a young person ready for adulthood lay on a mat while the tattoo artist tapped intricate patterns across the body, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The pain was not a side effect but a test. To endure meant you were strong enough to join the community fully. To quit meant not just personal shame, but shame for your family. Every design signified something sacred: family lines, God's blessings, readiness for marriage, or the bravery of a warrior. Even now, Polynesian tattoos connect people to their ancestors, a living story on the skin. When outsiders first saw these practices, some were drawn to the art, others disturbed. Sailors under Captain Cook brought the art back to Europe, often misunderstanding the deep meaning and using tattoos as souvenirs of their journeys. Still, the tradition's roots held fast. Tattooing here had never been about fashion, but about strength, ritual, and remembrance. As we travel to East Asia, the meaning of tattoos twists through both pride and punishment. In ancient China, tattoos were not admired. They were often marks of disgrace. People found guilty of breaking the law were branded with ink on their faces or necks, permanent labels of criminal or traitor. The tattoo became both a sentence and a scar for life. But even in this heavy shadow, some chose tattoos on purpose, to honor friendships, bravery, or loyalty to a cause. Tales tell of warriors inked from head to toe, their bodies covered with visions of power and wild stories. Japan's history is similar, but layered still more. Tattoos in early times were thought to protect against spirits or show status among fishermen. Later, they were used to mark criminals, one line per crime, a tally for the world to see. Yet, over generations, Japanese tattoos became a hidden art. Exquisitely detailed, they told stories across the back and arms: lions, gods, flowers, and rivers. Men known for courage risked these full-body tattoos, keeping them private as signs of strength or defiance. For some, tattoos were membership, marking ties strong as family or warning of status in underworld groups. In both China and Japan, tattoos balanced meaning and shame, art and judgment, until the ink could serve as either shield or wound. In ancient Europe, the fate of tattoos shifted. Some groups, like the Celts and Picts, early peoples of Britain and Scotland, tattooed fierce blue patterns across their bodies, dyes taken from plants, forming swirling lines. These were not meant for decoration, but to strike fear, declare loyalty, or claim identity before battle. The Romans, who came after, saw tattoos in two ways. Some soldiers adopted marks of their legion, but mostly, tattooing was used as punishment. Prisoners, slaves, and runaways were forcibly tattooed with symbols of ownership or shame, a harsh, lifelong stamp. Later, as Christianity spread, tattooing became less accepted. The church declared it pagan, and the belief grew that the body should remain untouched. Still, on the margins, old habits lingered. Among Christian pilgrims, tattoos became tokens of faith, proving they'd reached Jerusalem. Elsewhere, small hidden marks offered blessings or protection, folk prayers given form. But for most, being tattooed meant being on the edge, suspected, questioned, watched. Some wore tattoos proudly, others carried them as unwanted reminders. As Europe's ships set sail in the 16th and 17th centuries, tattooing found its way back, not through priests or scientists, but through sailors. Inspired by encounters in the Pacific, crews came home with inked reminders, anchors, turtles, or animals, each with a meaning known to those at sea. Tattooing became sailors' language. A mark on your hand or arm could tell of storms faced, loved ones lost, or oceans crossed. In port cities, basic studios opened in shadowy rooms, often run by retired seamen. Tattoos were part badge, part story, and part superstition. With the invention of the electric tattoo machine in the late 1800s, everything changed again. Patented by Samuel O'Reilly, this invention made tattoos quicker, less painful, and more precise. Now, tattoos could truly become art. Circus shows and sideshows made spectacles of tattooed men and women, their bodies covered with shapes and stories. Performers like Nora Hildebrandt shared invented tales of being forced to cover her body with ink, and crowds came to see the living artwork. Despite fascination, tattoos were still seen as odd or rebellious. Hidden among those audiences, though, were people of high status quietly seeking tattoos, including members of royalty. Studios began spreading into cities, with artists, now including women, offering tattoos for memory, identity, or simply for the wonder of carrying a little art on your skin. As the 20th century brought further change, wars, prisons, and new movements, tattoos picked up new meanings. Inside prisons, hidden from the outside, tattoos communicated rank, sorrow, or time served. Makeshift, painful, and often dangerous, these secret marks linked people across lines of language and loyalty, each symbol a tiny story carried just beneath the skin. And so, through centuries, ink has told tales of pain and pride, healing and harm, defiance and belonging. Whether worn in celebration or disgrace, tattoos have always whispered, "I was here. My story matters." For men, life carried its own dangers. They were no less constant, only different. An accident in the fields, an infection from a simple scratch, an outburst from a neighbor who'd had too much to drink, or a crusade gone terribly wrong. Even something as basic as a trip to the market could end badly if you happened to meet a restless thief or an irritated taxman along the road. Death might come quietly, through disease when plague swept through the city, turning it into a graveyard overnight, or through hunger when famine stretched out across the land for months on end, leaving entire communities hollow and weak. Sometimes misfortune was all it took, like eating tainted grain and spending your final hours lost in fever and fear. And as for funerals, most people weren't given more than the bare minimum. The fear of spreading disease meant bodies were put to rest quickly. No embalming, no fine casket, just a shallow grave, a few hurried words, and a thin layer of earth if there was even space left near the church. So yes, during the Middle Ages, life was harsh, brief, always hounded by the shadow of death. There was no such thing as retirement. One day, you simply stopped coming. And now, as we look to the last part, your closing chapter begins. The old world's hope ends here. Picture a day in medieval Europe. You start the morning surrounded by grime, relieve yourself in a bucket, try to clean your teeth with nothing but hope, nearly faint from hunger, labor until your back aches, scratch from rough wool, pray to avoid illness, and narrowly escape punishment for something as simple as keeping a squirrel. This is just one day in that world. Still think you'd want to be a knight? Think again. The storybook image, brave warriors, gentle ladies, grand feasts in glowing halls, is only a product of tales and imagination. The genuine Middle Ages were hard, unforgiving, and deeply rooted in rigid social order. If you were born into poverty, you'd remain there. If you arrived in a wealthy family, you stood a better chance. But you too could die suddenly from a bad meal or a minor injury. Even nobles couldn't escape misery. Castles, far from being comfortable, were like cold stone caves filled with fleas, drafts, smoke, and marriages arranged for power, not love. True, you enjoyed wine and fur, but there was always the risk of dying in battle, from infection or from something as small as a splinter. Life wasn't simpler, just more demanding. Every task took longer. Every part of living, even eating or giving birth, carried real risks. Leisure was rare. If you did find a quiet space to dream, there was little chance to change your place. No way to change your status. No doctors as we know them. No quick answers to strange illnesses. Most people lived and died within a day's walk of where they were born. But here's the surprising part. Through all this, people still found reasons to sing, to laugh, to tell stories, to fall in love, and to search for what mattered most. They kept on, not because life was easy, but because human beings refused to let hardship take away all hope. Even in the darkest moments, they found ways to bring a little light. So, tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, with running water, medicine, and warmth all around you, perhaps pause for a moment. Give thanks for the time you live in, and for those before you who faced famine, rats, and rulers, so you would not have to. Long before the world knew her as Catherine the Great, ruler of Russia, bright spark of reform, and symbol of determination, she was simply known as Sophie. Sophie, born in 1729 into a lesser German princely family, grew up in a small duchy without much influence. But Sophie wasn't ordinary. She was clever, quick to learn, and driven by a deep desire to stand out. Her upbringing was stern. Her mother, Johanna, was focused on climbing up the social ladder and seldom showed warmth. Her father, a distant military man, was rarely present. Sophie learned early to balance respect with careful observation. She read widely, picked up new languages with ease, and waited to speak until she understood the mood of the room. Skills that would one day protect her in one of the world's most dangerous courts. When Russia's Empress Elizabeth set out to find a bride for her nephew, the future Tsar Peter, she looked beyond her own country. Peter himself was born in Germany, and Elizabeth believed a foreign bride would be easier to manage. Sophie seemed just right. She had noble blood, practiced the Lutheran faith, which she'd soon need to give up, and was spoken of as graceful and modest. At only 14, Sophie made the journey to Russia. She arrived in cold St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German clothes but carrying a determined smile. Her mother encouraged her forward, hoping for a future at court, but Sophie had her own ideas. To fit in, she converted to Russian Orthodoxy, taking the name Catherine. The change was more than a formality. Her public conversion was a bold step. She was burning bridges with her old life behind her. No one could have guessed then what would come next. Betrayal, revolution, and a place in history. From her very first steps in the Russian palace, Sophie stopped being pushed by others and began quietly working out how she might rise to the top. Catherine's marriage to Peter should have secured her position, but instead she felt trapped, not crowned. Peter was nothing like a storybook prince, awkward, childish, and more interested in his toy soldiers than in governing or showing love. Some say he refused to even share a married life with Catherine for years. He admired the Prussian King Frederick and looked down on the Russian court. Catherine, on the other hand, poured herself into learning all she could about Russia, mastering the language, memorizing traditions, and embracing the culture. Peter looked for a way out, while Catherine wanted to belong. Their differences were not just personal, but political. The Russian court was full of gossip, suspicion, and plans behind closed doors. Catherine was always being watched, her mail read, her friendships probed. She could not trust her husband, her mother who still had her own agenda, or the staff around her. In this environment, friends could become enemies overnight. Catherine learned to tread carefully, making quiet allies among the guards and scholars, and winning respect for her dignified, calm approach, so different from her husband's open scorn for Russian custom. In private, she read the works of philosophers and began to imagine a better Russia, stronger, wiser, and more just. But as long as Peter lived, Catherine's hopes were out of reach. So she waited, learned, and made her plans. Taking the throne would mean more than waiting for an inheritance. It would require action. In 1762, after many years of patience and preparation, Catherine saw her chance. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, newly crowned as Tsar, quickly made enemies in every part of the court. In a few short months, Peter upset the church, angered nobles, insulted the army, and praised Russia's longtime foe, Prussia. He undid important policies, spoke openly of leaving Catherine for someone else, and lost the respect of those he needed most. Even ordinary Russians began to resent their new ruler. While Peter was away from the capital, Catherine acted. With the help of loyal army officers, including Gregory Orlov and his brothers, she rode out in full ceremonial dress, was declared empress, and won the support of the imperial guard. Peter, caught off guard and friendless, gave up within days. Not long after, he died under suspicious circumstances. While the official story was illness, few believed it. Catherine was now empress, not through birth or marriage, but through sheer will and careful strategy. It was something never seen before. A foreign-born woman with no natural claim had taken the Russian throne without battle. But now came an even greater test. Would she be able to hold on to what she had won? Would the court support her, or would she meet the same fate as Peter? Catherine understood that what was gained through plotting could be lost just as quickly. She would need to lead as a builder, not as an outsider. Once she had the crown, Catherine could have rested. But she wanted more than comfort. She dreamed of bringing great change to Russia, not just in war or government, but in the way people thought. While Peter admired foreign kings and played with model armies, Catherine admired writers and thinkers who encouraged learning and fairness. She genuinely believed that rulers should serve their people, even though she held complete control. Catherine didn't just read about enlightenment. She put those ideas into action. She wrote to famous thinkers, inviting discussion and debate, sometimes defending her own authority. She helped support writers, gathered great libraries, and spent countless hours on new laws and policies. Early in her reign, she attempted to reshape Russia's legal system, inviting representatives from around the nation to contribute to a new law code. Her instructions to them spoke of fairness, an end to torture, and the idea that rulers should act for the common good. For her time, in her land, these were daring thoughts. But Catherine understood that ideas had to fit the place. Russia, with its powerful nobles and deep traditions, could not be changed overnight. As she worked to open new schools, give more people a chance at learning, and reduce the worst punishments, she was also careful to keep the loyalty of those with power. She allowed the landowners to keep their hold over the villagers who worked for them. This was Catherine's challenge: to appear as a modern, thoughtful ruler in public, while always protecting her position behind the scenes. Her dream was to move Russia forward, not to mimic Europe, but to shape a stronger, more united Russia as she saw it. Changes would happen, but only with steady guidance. Catherine's vision extended beyond her homeland's borders. Her aim was to make Russia a nation to be noticed, both respected and feared. Under her direction, Russia fought a series of wars, most notably with the Ottoman Empire. These battles were not just for land. They were about proving Russia's power, defending Christians in neighboring lands, and opening access to crucial trade routes. Under skilled generals, Russia took control of Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and ports long sought after by earlier rulers. Each victory sent a message. Russia was no longer distant or backward. It belonged among the great nations. She also looked west, joining with other empires to break apart the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and take new territory. By the end of these campaigns, Russia's reach and population had grown greatly. But Catherine didn't stop with conquering by force. She encouraged the founding of new towns, expanding trade, and inviting skilled workers from abroad to settle Russian lands. The country became a patchwork of peoples and places under her rule, stretching from icy coasts to warm southern shores. Some saw her ambitions as greedy, but to Catherine, building a strong and lasting empire was destiny. Only a ruler who expanded her country and left it stronger could be truly great. Within the walls of her palaces, Catherine became just as well known for her private life as for her leadership. She did not keep her romantic connections secret. Many young, attractive, sometimes influential men became her companions. When a relationship ended, she was generous and dignified in her farewells. Among all her partners, Gregory Potemkin mattered most. Their partnership blended love, political advice, and shared ambitions. Some believe they were secretly married. Together, they planned campaigns and shaped the future of the southern lands. Still, Catherine's reputation outside Russia was often colored by wild rumors and spiteful gossip, especially after her death. The most shocking stories were spread by enemies who wanted to tarnish her name. Why this focus? Because she was a woman who ruled without apology, refusing to play the roles expected of her. She believed deeply in finding happiness where she could, and that personal feelings need not get in the way of responsibility. Often, Catherine's closest allies were chosen for their loyalty and ability to help her rule. When their usefulness ended, she let them go, usually with kindness. Far from undermining her authority, these relationships often strengthened it, a mix of affection and political calculation that made her leadership unique. But Catherine's long time on the throne was not without grave dangers. In 1773, threats rose not from abroad, but from the heart of her own realm. A man named Yemelyan Pugachev claimed loudly to be Catherine's late husband, Peter, and promised freedom, lower taxes, and land to the suffering peasants and soldiers of Russia's interior. His promises sparked hope where there had been only hardship. The rebellion that followed grew into the largest uprising of its kind in Russian history. As towns fell, nobles were killed, and for a while, even the safety of the empire seemed at risk. Catherine was shaken. This was no outside enemy, but a challenge from her own people. She brought in her most trusted generals and put down the revolt with decisive force. Pugachev was captured, put on public display, and executed in Moscow as a warning to others. After this, Catherine became more cautious. She leaned more on the nobility for support, and her earlier dreams of freeing the ordinary people faded. The lesson was clear. The ideas of the Enlightenment could only go so far in a land where so many clung to the old ways. Rules grew stricter, surveillance expanded, and even whispers of rebellion were quickly stamped out. Pugachev's defeat left a lingering reminder. An empire built on inequality could remain strong only for so long before unrest returned. As Catherine's long reign neared its end, she had ruled longer than any other female monarch in Russian history. From the moment she took the throne, she defied the world's expectations, reshaped a vast land, and showed what was possible for a woman in power. Under her rule, Russia grew by hundreds of thousands of square miles, securing vital ports and new regions. But her accomplishments were not just on the battlefield. Catherine left a rich cultural legacy. She helped found great museums, gathered renowned art collections, and brought together the brightest minds of her time. Her court became a shining center for the arts, for knowledge, and for ambition. She modernized education, made it possible for girls to go to school, and supported the spread of books. She championed advances in health, including vaccination against smallpox. And yet, her time as ruler was marked by contradictions. Though she admired enlightened thinking, she never freed the serfs, and in fact made their burden even heavier in some parts of Russia. Her most sweeping changes remained firmly controlled from above. Even so, Catherine provided stability and set her sights high. She understood that power was not handed down. It had to be taken, guarded, and carefully maintained. She was called many things: a schemer, a tyrant, a modernizer, a temptress. But above all, she was effective. By the time she died in 1796, Russia was larger, richer, and stronger than it had been for generations. She left behind not only an empire, but a legend that would echo for centuries. Catherine did not simply hold power. She seized it, guided it, and became more than a ruler. She became a myth. But for all her greatness, Catherine was always, at heart, a woman navigating a man's world, forever aware of how fragile her position was. She was a foreigner by birth, a queen by coup, leading a land that would have preferred anyone else. Still, she not only survived, she flourished. She was never satisfied with the surface. Her days were filled with reading, writing, and constant learning. From morning to night, she read government reports, wrote to leaders across Europe, corrected papers, and managed a palace full of rivals. She did not just sit on the throne, she worked tirelessly to remain there. Despite being surrounded by courtiers, artists, and companions, she admitted in her own writings that she trusted very few. Her son, Paul, whom she kept away from power, grew into a man she feared would undo her achievements. Her deepest bond with Gregory Potemkin changed over the years to a lasting friendship, and his death in 1791 left her truly grieving. Catherine was careful in shaping her image. She knew the power of stories, and she used them well, presenting herself as mother to Russia, enlightened leader, warrior, and patron of the arts. Beneath all these roles was a person who had weathered betrayal, scandal, and unrest, and kept moving forward. When she died, she left behind an empire forever changed, but also difficult questions. Could she have done more for the ordinary people? Were her enlightened ideals sacrificed for safety? Was she more reformer or more ruler? The title, the Great, was never one she gave herself. It was given because she dared to take and keep power at a time when women were told they had none. She did not just wear the crown. She redefined what it meant to deserve one. Deep in the green shade of the southern Mexican forests, the ancient city of Palenque waits, its stone towers peering out above the trees, shaped by the hands and mysteries of the Maya. Here, in 1994, a secret was unsealed. Led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, a team of archaeologists explored Temple 3, a modest structure standing beside the more famous tomb of Pakal the Great. They expected little until they noticed a hidden space beneath the temple, perfectly undisturbed by thieves or time. Opening it, they found a stone coffin, silent and heavy with the years. When its lid was lifted, red dust billowed upward, filling the chamber with a startling, brilliant color. The interior was blanketed in powdered cinnabar, a mineral sacred to the Maya. Lying inside the crimson haze was the skeleton of a woman, set to rest with great care. Her skull bore a jade mask, and her body was surrounded by precious objects, necklaces, crowns, earrings, carved from jade and shell. Everything about this burial spoke of royalty, yet nowhere was her name written. No carvings revealed her identity. Hers was one of the richest tombs ever found for a woman in ancient Central America. but her story was still wrapped in mystery. Who was she? Why was she covered in red powder? Was she a queen? A priestess? Perhaps even the wife of the famous ruler Pakal? The scientists called her the Red Queen, and the title remains. Even now, with modern tests and equipment, her true name is lost. We only know that she lived in the 600s, during Palenque's greatest days. Her tomb was untouched, purposefully hidden and set apart. The way she was buried wasn't just for show, it was deeply spiritual. She was meant to be honored not through words or writing, but through powerful symbols and the air of mystery surrounding her. The most striking part of her burial was the red dust itself, a thick layer of cinnabar that covered everything, from her body and sarcophagus to the walls and the items around her. It clung to every surface like blood. For the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar was sacred and rare, its bright red calling forth the ideas of blood, new beginnings, and the strong force that linked people to gods. Red meant life and death, sunrise and sacrifice. It wasn't only for appearance, it was a spiritual act. To cover the dead in cinnabar was to help them move from this life to another, not merely to preserve the body, but to prepare it for something greater beyond. The Maya believed that dying was a passage, a move into a new realm. Whoever the Red Queen was, those who buried her prepared her not only for the journey, but for becoming something almost divine. Yet there is another side to cinnabar. It is dangerous. People exposed to it over time can fall ill, even die. The Maya may not have understood this exactly, but they respected its power. Only very few in Palenque were honored with so much of this sacred dust. One was Pakal the Great himself. Because of this, many wonder, was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, or someone just as important? Under her head was the skin of a jaguar, another symbol of authority. Close by were bone needles, sharp blades made of obsidian, and small jade carvings, hinting at rituals done for her or perhaps by her. Every piece is a silent message, one of strength, privacy, and sacred preparation for the underworld journey. Within the silence of her tomb, the Red Queen rested surrounded by jade, shell, and stone. These weren't just decorations, but offerings chosen to aid her journey to the Maya's afterlife. Heavy green jade necklaces ran along her neck, bright even after centuries sealed away. Jade was precious beyond price. Only the most powerful wore it, and to be buried in it was proof of her status and possibly her divine favor. A delicate jade mask was set gently atop her face. Unlike the golden masks of Egypt, this one was simple, made from tiny pieces arranged to match her features. Its job was to keep her soul safe, to hold her identity, and to show her as sacred before the gods. Around her, bone pins, obsidian blades, and shell trinkets could have been tools for ceremony or marks of her rank, as healer, priestess, or royal matriarch. One bone pin still bore faint markings, a message now almost erased. At her feet and the tomb's edges, lidded clay pots may once have spilled out perfumes, food, or drink, the support one would need for the dangerous afterlife journey. Death, for the Maya, was not an ending but a test, and these items were meant to help her through. There was no showy display of gold or carriages, only items selected for their sacred purpose, a map to guide her soul. Through these clues, we glimpse an understanding of passing not as loss, but as movement towards something higher. The Red Queen's burial was not meant for forgetfulness, but for rising to a new form of greatness. Despite the care, her tomb remains silent. There is no name, no glyphs, no obvious story. From the moment of discovery, researchers have tried to find out who she was. The strongest theory is that she was Tsakbu Ajao, the wife of Pakal the Great, the famous king of Palenque. Tsakbu Ajao came from a noble family herself, married into the ruling line, and had at least 3 sons, who went on to hold their own high positions. She was more than a wife. She took part in important ceremonies and was central to her husband's reign. If anyone deserved such a rich burial, it was likely her. Supporting this idea is the fact that her tomb rests beside Pakal's, almost certainly paired on purpose. The use of cinnabar dust also connects their graves. However, tests on their remains didn't confirm a blood relationship, but that does not rule out marriage. Others have suggested she might be Pakal's powerful mother or another important ancestor. Still, the closest match is Tsakbu Ajao, a queen, mother, and spiritual partner of Pakal. Perhaps her silence was meant to ensure she lived on not in letters, but in traditions and color. To truly know the Red Queen, we must look at her world. A world where royal Maya women often held more sway than one might think. In Maya society, families ruled together, and women of noble blood were not just wives, but leaders. They took part in ceremonies, built temples, and played vital roles in holding their family's power. Their bloodline strengthened claims to the throne, and sometimes, when the throne was empty, they had to lead themselves. Pakal's own mother, Sakkuk, served as queen when the city needed guidance, not just holding a place, but leading actively, issuing orders and starting major building projects. Across the Maya world, women appear in stone carvings, sometimes performing ceremonies, sometimes even leading armies or making deals. They stood beside their husbands, or at times stood above them, sharing fully in the responsibilities and honors of kingship. They once inscribed their stories in stone, their names passing from generation to generation, until, slowly, their memory faded. When Spanish conquerors reached this land long after, so much of the past had already been lost. Through foreign eyes, indigenous women seemed silent, living in a world run by men. But when we look more closely at the evidence left behind, another narrative emerges. Here, gender and authority were woven together in complex ways, with influence earned and negotiated. This understanding invites us to see the woman called the Red Queen differently. She may never have worn a royal title, but her burial, lavish, sacred, and placed beside the ruler Pal, makes clear her central role in their lineage. Her jade mask was not mere finery, but a powerful emblem, a sign of identity preserved, strength honored in both life and death. Her family ties may have connected and secured the house of Palanca itself. Within this civilization, a queen did much more than reign. She watched over holy traditions, guided ceremonies, and acted as the connecting voice between the divine and the human. The Red Queen's true name is unknown to us, but her voice, expressed through her burial and memory, echoes on. Her tomb was not just a chamber of wealth, but a purposeful space layered with meaning. Maya beliefs, sacred designs, and symbolic rituals. This resting place was crafted not to simply mark an ending, but as a route to the eternal. Her remains were discovered within Temple 3, a smaller structure deep inside the city of Palanque. Its closeness to the grand temple of the inscriptions, where Pal rests, is significant. These buildings were not placed at random. Every position followed patterns of the stars, old stories, and royal tradition. Temple 3 doesn't rival its great neighbor in size, but holds a mystery just as profound. A sealed vault, never disturbed, unchanged over centuries. Built at the very heart of the temple and only reachable by a steep, narrow set of stairs, the descent itself seems to echo a symbolic journey, descending into the underworld. The walls inside are plain, shaped from carefully cut stone, and have stood undisturbed for more than 1,000 years. No glyphs, no colorful scenes, just silence, perhaps chosen on purpose. This chamber was for the spirits, not for the eyes of those still living. At the center rests her limestone coffin, set like a sacred altar, a humble echo of Pal's mighty tomb nearby. Where Pal's sarcophagus is adorned with images of heavenly rebirth, the Red Queen's is more restrained, focused within, on the painted red, on the rites of death itself. Yet the architectural hints remain. The tomb is set from east to west, mirroring the sun's daily journey. It's a small space, but filled with intention, a sacred haven for someone dearly cherished. For the Maya, their temples connected worlds, heaven above, earth here, the shadowy realm below. To be buried in such a place was to step beyond the limits of ordinary life. The Red Queen's final home was built with care, a shrine meant to transform death into something new. She rests in stone, covered in vibrant red pigment, her presence lingering in every carved step and sealed stone. Even in silence, her tomb declares her importance. To the Maya, dying was not just a conclusion. It marked a threshold, a crossing into the deep, mysterious underworld known as Xibalba. For a person of the Red Queen's standing, this journey carried many layers: spiritual, political, ceremonial. Burial practices were carefully arranged, guided by legend, meant to help the soul navigate darkness and peril. The journey through the underworld would not be peaceful or easy. It was filled with trials and dangers, and only those properly buried and ritually prepared could hope to cross safely. The Red Queen's body was wrapped in vivid red, placed in a stone coffin, and given many gifts, a sure sign of her high rank. The presence of tiny bone needles and sharp obsidian in her grave suggests offerings tied to self-sacrifice, acts she may have carried out while alive, or rituals meant now to empower her spirit's passage. Her jade mask, painstakingly pieced together, was more than adornment. It was a vessel to keep her face recognized by the gods as she moved beyond this world. To Maya minds, a face was the mirror of one's soul. Recognition in the afterlife depended on this likeness. The clay vessels that surrounded her might once have held treasured foods, perhaps chocolate, maize, water, or rich pulque, to feed her on her journey. Other objects like stingray spines or shell trumpets may have served in holy rites, calling to spirits or opening channels for communication. This burial was a transformation, not simply an ending. Maya beliefs saw the cycle of death and rebirth mirrored in seeds placed in the earth, burial as planting, the hereafter as flowering again. Their rulers, kings and queens, were thought of as living gods. At death, they returned to those roots of divinity, covered in red like lifeblood, placed within a pyramid, and honored with ritual. The Red Queen was being set forth, not just to rest, but to be reborn, connected forever to cosmic balance. Her grave did not mark her disappearance, but the beginning of enduring legend. Just steps away from where the Red Queen was laid to rest lies another of Mesoamerica's most celebrated tombs, that of Kinich Janab Paul, remembered as Pal the Great. His burial within the Temple of the Inscriptions is known for its artwork, size, and deep religious meaning. Yet, what makes the Red Queen's grave so noteworthy is not just her treasures, but its precise location. Her coffin, hidden inside Temple 3, stands directly beside Pal's own. In Palenque, where every temple was oriented with purpose, their closeness was no accident. It was a message in stone. Many experts believe the Red Queen was Zakbu Aja, Pal's queen and closest companion. Although her crypt bears no written name, the echoes between their deaths are unmistakable, both wrapped in red pigment, both resting within pyramids, both sent off with jade, both shown deep respect. Their death rituals seem to mirror each other, like chapters of a single sacred tale. On Pal's sarcophagus, he is shown descending the mythical tree of the underworld, a picture of dying and returning. The Red Queen's grave is quieter, without images, but the unity lies in their pairing. As Pal reflected the sun, traveling through night to rise again, the Red Queen may have stood for the moon, the mysterious feminine presence in the sky. Together they were a symbol of cosmic balance, male and female, king and queen, sunlight and moonlight, structured order and sacred ritual. In Maya belief, ruling was never a solitary task. Balance in the universe called for harmony between powers, which extended through the royal family. By laying the Red Queen next to Pal, the Maya people echoed not just a marriage, but a celestial partnership. Their nearness in death may well reflect their equal partnership in life. A queen by her king's side, sharing honor and influence. Their tombs, simple yet profound, speak for them. Two spirits joined in vivid red and hard stone, bound together across time. Though history has lost her name, the Red Queen of Palenque stands as one of the most captivating, powerful women from the ancient world. Her grave, sealed for more than 13 centuries, now calls out through time, each new discovery whispering her significance. Much about her remains hidden. No ancient words recorded her name. No carved pillar tells her life. But the care given to her burial, the wealth of her offerings, the red-stained bones, they all testify. She held vital influence, not only as someone's wife, but as a person of authority, spiritual strength, and royal blood. Now, the Red Queen asks us to reconsider our old beliefs. She reminds us that Maya women were not silent. They led rituals, governed their people, and shaped dynasties. Rulers like Pal dominated the history books, but with the Red Queen re-emerging, we see that leadership flowed through mothers, sovereigns, priestesses, and seers as well. Her importance isn't just in the artifacts she left behind, but in the change she inspires, in how we study the past, share stories, and think about women's power. Every green jade bead, every layer of red pigment, every meaningful architectural detail tells us she mattered. And perhaps her greatest lesson is in what remains unknown, the questions she still invites us to ask. The Red Queen shows us that history is not fixed. Rather, it is a living mystery, an invitation to reach across the ages. Because of this, her story is still unfolding. She remains wrapped in the color of life, death, sacrifice, and renewal. Her likeness, once hidden behind a jade mask, now meeting our gaze through science, art, and awe. She may have ruled in life. In death, she still commands our imagination. Her tomb held tight in stone, her life written in silence. Yet somehow, she continues whispering to us. Frida Kahlo entered the world on July 6, 1907, in the lively neighborhood of Coyoacan, then a small village just beyond Mexico City's edge. The family home, the Casa Azul, shone with color, contrasts, and quiet strength. In time, it grew into both her refuge and her battlefield, a home that would one day become a museum to her memory. She was the third of 4 daughters, born to Guillermo Kahlo, a photographer from Germany and Hungary, and Matilde Calderón, a devout Catholic whose family roots traced both indigenous and Spanish lines. Her parents were a study in differences. Her father was reserved and thoughtful. Her mother was faithful and distant. From them, Frida inherited both imagination and fierce determination. As a child, she was lively and inquisitive, always searching for answers and speaking up. Yet, at age 6, Frida became ill with polio, leaving her right leg thinner and weaker, a difference she hid beneath her long dresses but never let define her spirit. Months spent bedridden made her feel alone, but brought her closer to her father, who urged her to stay active, to bike, to challenge her mind. Unlike many girls her age, Frida dreamed not of marriage or homemaking, but of medicine. At 15, she was accepted to Mexico's National Preparatory School, one of only a few girls among the students. There, she stood apart for her sharp intellect, quick wit, and expressive style. She joined a circle of intellectuals, the cachuchas, who debated ideas and pushed against the status quo. Frida gravitated toward revolution, wanting to question the world she saw. Even before the fateful day that reshaped her fate, Frida Kahlo was carving her own path, a young woman unwilling to be boxed in by anyone else's expectations. It was September 17, 1925, when her life split in two. The girl she had been and the woman she would be. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her partner Alejandro Gomez Arias after school. They laughed, argued, perhaps teased each other. Frida was never one to hold back. Moments later, disaster came as a streetcar crashed into their bus. In a flash, her world was changed by pain and silence. The accident was devastating. The bus was crushed and Frida was gravely wounded. A metal rail pierced her hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spine broke in several places. Her right leg was shattered. Her foot and collarbone were smashed. Ribs broken. Her shoulder thrown out of place, and her abdomen wounded. She was just 18. As she lay among the chaos, a borrowed coat covered her. Someone saw her body, not just stained with blood, but sparkling with the gold powder she had carried, scattered over her by the force of the crash. Frida was taken to the hospital, where she endured many surgeries over the coming months, lying for weeks in a full body cast, unable to move. The future she had planned, to study medicine, grew ever distant. But in that forced stillness, a new path began. Her father gave her brushes, and her mother rigged a special easel over the bed. A mirror was fixed so she could see herself, and so, confined, Frida began to paint. At first, she did so to pass the time, but soon it became her obsession. Her earliest paintings were self-portraits, not from vanity, but because she was her only model. "I paint myself because I am so often alone," she would later say, "and because I am the subject I know best." What started as simple therapy turned into a deep exploration. She was not just telling her story, but trying to save herself. The accident had broken her, but in that pain she discovered a doorway to her own mind, her own body, and eventually to the symbolic language that would fill her art. Frida, once eager to heal others, now began healing herself, one painting at a time. Lying in a body cast, struggling with every breath, Frida found her voice through painting. Art became her way to speak honestly about her own pain, both physical and emotional, even when the results were difficult to witness. She did not paint gentle scenes. She painted her struggle. Her early works were small, made on simple surfaces, inspired by traditional Mexican devotional images meant to convey both suffering and hope. She brought this tradition inside herself, her body as the altar, her emotions as the offering. Her self-portraits showed her wounded, pierced, sometimes weeping or broken, yet always defiant, always gazing straight ahead. She painted the scars and ugliness with color and, often, with a touch of humor. Each work was a way to reclaim her body, her story, her sense of self, as a woman in a world keen to define her for her. But Frida went further than autobiography. She invented a new visual form, one that blended folk art, surrealism, medical imagery, and rich symbolism. As she slowly recovered enough to walk, Frida was no longer the same person longing for a life in medicine. She had become an artist, her art unlike anything that had come before. Out of her worst tragedy, she carved a new identity. Frida Kahlo transformed her pain into creation, forcing the world not just to witness her suffering, but to recognize the sacredness in it. In 1928, while still healing and just 21, Frida met the man who would have the greatest and most complicated impact on her life, Diego Rivera. He was many years older, celebrated across Mexico as the country's most famous painter, immense in every way. Rivera was famed for his sweeping murals telling the story of the Mexican people. Frida already admired his work, but now she wanted his opinion on her paintings. She boldly brought her art to him, interrupting his mural work to ask, "Do I have talent?" Rivera, looking at her pieces, saw more than skill. He found honesty, an unyielding voice filled with boldness, irony, suffering, and beauty. Their connection was instant and intense. Frida later said, "I suffered two serious accidents in my life. One was the bus, the other was Diego." They married a year later. To outsiders, the pair seemed mismatched. Diego, large and widely unfaithful. Frida, fiercely independent, already walking with a cane. Her family called it a union between an elephant and a dove. Their partnership was both creative and chaotic. Diego supported her art and challenged her growth, but his constant affairs, including one with Frida's sister Cristina, deeply wounded her. In response, Frida took lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored relationships with Leon Trotsky and the painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to marry again a year later, this time with Frida keeping her own name, house, and financial control. Their second partnership was less about romance and more about shared purpose and mutual understanding. Through every betrayal and heartbreak, Diego remained a powerful influence. He challenged her, hurt her, but also stood by her vision as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman redefining what painting could achieve. Their life together was never simple, but together they became legendary. During the 1930s, Frida journeyed with Diego to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he fulfilled large mural commissions. These years abroad exposed her to America's contrasts, industry, wealth, and the realities of capitalism, which made her uncomfortable. Frida was deeply proud of her Mexican heritage, committed to leftist politics, and loved traditional customs. Witnessing American luxury while the Great Depression brought suffering elsewhere, she became even more disillusioned. Through letters home, she criticized the focus on material goods and outward appearances, longing for the color and wildness of Mexico. While Diego painted large murals, Frida turned inward, creating smaller, more intimate self-portraits. Her style, dreamlike, emotional, and vivid, hardened during this time, often showing her pain, her strength, and her unique identity. Her paintings from these years are among her most recognized. These are not simply self-portraits, but evidence of survival. Her face calm amid devastation, her body in pain, her eyes never looking away. One especially powerful piece, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying in a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by images of loss. A lost child, a snail, medical tools, a broken pelvis. It is painfully honest, yet impossible to ignore. Back in Mexico, Frida became even more involved in radical politics. She and Diego gave refuge to Leon Trotsky when he lived in exile. Frida dressed in traditional indigenous attire, not just for beauty, but as a political act, a celebration of her heritage. Her beliefs and her art were never separate. While Diego painted the story of revolution, Frida painted its cost. The body in pieces, the mind in turmoil, identity reflected back from the edge. When Frida returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she had outgrown her role as only Diego Rivera's wife. She had become a force of her own, an artist whose work radiated with boldness, dreamlike imagery, and a strong sense of self. Her home, the Casa Azul in Coyoacán, became a living canvas, bright walls, folk art in every corner, statues and animals everywhere. The place was alive with her vision, mixing tradition with rebellion. Frida surrounded herself with ancient relics, folk crafts, and books of revolution. She wore colorful dresses, twined flowers in her hair, and painted as scents and songs drifted in from the streets. This time marked a great flourish of creativity. Her paintings became more detailed, more layered, and increasingly political. Works such as The Two Fridas portrayed a divided self. One in elegant dress, heart-bleeding, the other in traditional attire, strong and whole. These paintings were her visual diaries, records of love, loss, and culture. Her work was celebrated abroad. In 1939, a Paris exhibition brought praise from artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky, though Frida resisted being labeled a surrealist. "They thought I painted dreams," she said, "but I painted my own reality." Her paintings honored Mexico, not as a fantasy, but as a living, complex home, full of both beauty and struggle. Even as her creative powers grew, her health continued to decline. Pain, surgeries, and infections became part of daily life. Still, Frida painted on, sometimes propped up in bed, corseted from chest to hip, her fingers tight on her brush. She had come home to reclaim her power through art, politics, and fearless self-expression. As the 1940s wore on, Frida's body grew more fragile. Her spine deteriorated, her leg ached, and she faced one surgery after another, sometimes forced to lie still for months at a time. Yet she continued painting, each picture both an escape and a challenge to her suffering. Her later works took on darker tones, more direct and fearless. In The Broken Column, she shows herself torn straight down, her body pierced with nails, her backbone replaced by a crumbling pillar. Still, her face remains strong, her gaze unmoved. Physical pain became not just a subject, but a constant companion, her rival and her source of meaning. Frida's voice also grew sharper in politics. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, protested, wrote passionate letters, speaking out against oppression. When she could no longer walk, she joined demonstrations from her wheelchair, holding signs and shouting for justice. In 1953, at last, she received her first solo show in Mexico. Too weak to attend, her doctors begged her not to go. But Frida arrived on a hospital stretcher, placed in the center of the gallery on her bed, dressed in bright colors, surrounded by her art, welcoming visitors with laughter, tequila, and defiance in her eyes. Her final paintings blended innocence and sorrow. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself again in a corset, held by supportive hands, pushing away the symbols of pain. Her last known work was a still life of watermelons, one wedge marked with the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even as her time ended, she remained hopeful, rebellious, and fully herself. On July 13, 1954, at 47, Frida died in the same Blue House where her life began. The official cause was a blood clot, but those close to her believed she was worn down, not just physically, but by years of relentless struggle. Only days before, she had insisted on attending a political rally, weak and in her chair, fist lifted high, her final act of resistance. In her diary, her last words were simple and honest. "I hope the leaving is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her farewell was held in Mexico's grandest cultural palace, her casket draped in the red flag of her party, watched over by those who loved and fought alongside her. Diego Rivera, heartbroken, called her the love of his life, even as their union had often been full of pain. Yet, after her passing, something remarkable happened. Frida Kahlo refused to be forgotten. For a while, her art was only mentioned in quiet circles, being too political for some and too unconventional for others. But over time, her image, her story, her courage reached many more. By the 1970s, as movements advocating for women and the marginalized grew stronger, Frida's voice became ever more significant, not just as a painter, but as a symbol of survival, resistance, cultural pride, and authenticity. Her unibrow, her crown of flowers, her intense gaze became recognized everywhere. Her home became a museum. Her words read as sacred text. Her art hung in the most esteemed galleries. Frida Kahlo, who had often been overlooked alongside Diego Rivera, stepped into her own light after death. Today, her face appears everywhere, on shirts, murals, toys, posters. Her image instantly familiar. But her impact lies deeper than appearance. She never tried to be perfect. She never fit any mold. She did not want to. In a world that asks for flawlessness, she offered truth, raw, passionate, honest, full of contradictions. She celebrated her differences, her disability, her queerness, her boldness, and made art that crossed borders and bridged decades. She is now much more than a painter. Frida is seen as a symbol of courage, feminist power, cultural pride, of art formed in adversity. For LGBTQ communities, she is embraced as an openly bisexual icon who loved bravely when few dared. For women, she is proof that strength needs no permission. For those who live with pain or difference, she stands as inspiration, that suffering is not the end, but can be transformed into beauty. For Mexico, she is a daughter welcomed home, as fierce and unique as ever. Her paintings, once rejected as too odd or too private, are treasured around the world. Works like the two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column are not just admired but deeply felt by all who have struggled and turned hardship into meaning. She lived at the edge and pulled it into the center. She contained many sides: a rebel who wore gold, a wounded woman who continued to love, a body marked by scars, but a spirit stronger still. Through it all, she painted not just with her hands, but with iron will. Frida Kahlo didn't seek to become an icon. She simply told her truth. In doing so, she spoke for countless others who had never seen their story reflected in art before. Whenever we see her face today, we find courage, we find color, we find hope and rebellion. Frida is not lost. She is everlasting.